Large intestine also absorption occurs, right? Because the excretory product or the undigested food gets absorbed into the large intestine. Assimilation is the process wherein the tissues that are present in the organ, they absorb the nutrients or various substances from the bloodstream so that they can perform various activities. Raw food also better blanch it and then eat it. Don't directly eat it because every time we cannot say that the food is clean and neat. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to the last session of this chapter, that is chapter 16, Digestion and Absorption. I am Dr. Divya, Biology faculty, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Mysuru, Temple of Excellence. So in the previous session of this chapter, we had discussed about how the digestion of the food occurs, starting right from the mouth to the intestine, that is the small intestine, because the digestion completely gets over in the small intestine and then the undigested food enters into the large intestine and then it gets excreted out through the rectum and then through the anus. So this is how it occurs. So in this particular session, we shall discuss about how the digested food gets absorbed, and if the digested food doesn't get absorbed properly, or if there is some problem in the digestion, what are the disorders that might occur. So to begin with, we shall see how the absorption of the digested products takes place. So what are the biomacromolecules that are present in the food? They are the proteins, the carbohydrates and the lipids, right? So all had got digested when the food reached the small intestine. So these digested food, which consists of the simpler forms of proteins, carbohydrates and the lipids, how do they get absorbed to different parts of the body? So the process by which the end products of digestion pass through the intestinal mucosa into the blood or the lymph. So how does the digested food gets absorbed? So the digested food gets absorbed by a process in which whatever end products of digestion are there. So what are the end products of digestion here? They are nothing but the simpler forms of the carbohydrates, the proteins and the fats, right? So these simpler forms, they pass through the intestinal mucosa. So intestinal mucosa is nothing but a lining of the small intestine. So they pass through the intestinal mucosa and then they enter into the blood or the lymph, because the blood is one of the important component that actually carries the minerals or the nutrients or the proteins or the lipids or the carbohydrates, everything into different parts of the body. So based on this, how they are carried, how the mucosa secretes the food out, which are later being absorbed by the blood or the lymph and then being carried to different parts. So this particular process is of two types. One is passive absorption and the other one is active absorption. So we shall see exactly what are these two. So passive absorption. So small amount of monosaccharides. What were the monosaccharides? The polysaccharides, they got converted into disaccharides. The disaccharides, that is the carbohydrates, right? So the complex carbohydrates, that is the polysaccharide, got converted into the disaccharides. Those disaccharides got broken down into monosaccharides. So these small amounts of monosaccharides that are there in the small intestine, such as the glucose, the amino acids and some of the electrolytes such as the chloride ions, they are generally absorbed by simple diffusion. So what is diffusion? We have learnt about this process of diffusion in the chapter Transport in Plants. So if you have not understood, you can just look into that video, that is Transport in Plants. So we learned there that the diffusion is nothing but the process of movement of molecules from a region of higher concentration to region of lower concentration. So since the molecules here are moving from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, they do not need the expenditure of energy. So therefore it is a passive absorption process. Passive means they don't require any energy. So here, what are the molecules? That is, they are the small amounts of monosaccharides such as the glucose, amino acids, some of the electrolytes such as the chloride ions, they are moving from a region of higher concentration. Which is a region of higher concentration here? It is a small intestine, right? Because they are present in the small intestine. So from the small intestine through the mucosa, they have to move out into the region of lower concentration, that is the blood. So they will travel by a process of diffusion into the blood. So that is how it is a passive absorption process. Next is active absorption process. So the passage of these substances into the blood depends upon the concentration gradient. So depends upon the concentration gradient here again. So passive absorption is simply it is absorbed by the intestinal mucosa by a process of the simple diffusion process. So that is a passive absorption. Now from the mucosa it has to travel out into the bloodstream, right? Because the blood will be the one that is carrying all the nutrients and the minerals to different parts of the body. So if it has to enter into the blood, again here it depends on the concentration gradient. So what happens here? If the concentration gradient is more in the blood, then the movement of material into the blood will not take place. If it is less, then the movement will take place here, because in order to maintain a concentration gradient here. So depends upon the concentration gradient. So all these comes in your, you can understand if you have studied or if you have learnt about the transport in plants. So there we had studied about the concentration gradient, the diffusion process and all that. If not, you can just go back and take a look into the videos. So here there is a particular mechanism called as facilitated transport mechanism. So if you remember, we had learnt about facilitated diffusion and transport in plants, right? Wherein what is facilitated diffusion? Because sometimes what happens here is the plasma membrane that are present, they are in the case of plants. Otherwise, the membrane, in general, I'll use the word membrane because we're talking about an animal cell, right? We're talking about the human digestion process. So the membrane, they are selectively permeable to only certain substances. They will not allow all the substances to pass through. So if the substances has to pass through the lipid layer, then they have to take the help of a particular protein here. So that mechanism is called as a facilitated transport mechanism. So some substances like glucose and amino acids, they are absorbed into the cells or they move into the bloodstreams with the help of a carrier protein. So they have moved into the bloodstream. So now the bloodstream has to carry, the monosaccharides have moved into the bloodstream through a process of simple diffusion. Now, from the bloodstream, they have to move into different parts of the organs, right? So, if they have to move into different parts of the organs would have been covered by a membrane. And that membrane will not allow all the particles to enter into or leave out of it. So, if the particles of monosaccharides such as the glucose and amino acids have to be absorbed by these organs, then on the membrane of these organs, certain carrier proteins should be present. These carrier proteins will be the one which will act like vehicles. Like how for you to come from your house to a school, you have a carrier, right? What is a carrier there? It is a transportation vehicle that is there. So that school bus will act like a carrier which will pick you from your house and drop you to your school. It is a safe transport, right? Otherwise, you would have been in a problem to arrange for some transport and all that. It would have been difficult. Just like that here also, the carrier protein, the main function of that is to carry the molecules from one region into another region. So it acts like a school bus here. That is the simple way I can explain about a carrier protein. So these carrier proteins, they carry the glucose and amino acids into different organs. And this mechanism is called as the facilitated transport. So this is one kind of absorption by facilitated transport. One we learnt of is a passive absorption. Then we learnt of an active absorption. Then one more, that is a facilitated transport mechanism, wherein a carrier protein is involved which helps in the transport into different organs. So that is the facilitated transport mechanism. So next, moving on to one more process so we understood now how the monosaccharides are absorbed. So how are they absorbed? Monosaccharides are absorbed by three important steps. One is the passive absorption, the other one is the active absorption, and also sometimes it gets absorbed into the organs by facilitated transport mechanism. So now we shall see how the absorption of nutrients, monosaccharides and various electrolytes occur. So now, since we know about these two methods of absorption, that is passive absorption and active absorption. So passive absorption is nothing but a simple diffusion. Active absorption is nothing but based upon the concentration gradient. So keeping these two in mind, we shall see how exactly the different types of absorptions can occur, how different mechanisms involve themselves in helping the absorption of the food to different parts of the body. So first, talking about one particular mechanism which is called as facilitated transport mechanism. So here some of the monosaccharides such as the glucose and the amino acids, they cannot be directly absorbed because they will have to pass through a particular membrane of that organ. So if the blood has to carry it and deposit it into the organ, deposit these monosaccharides such as the glucose and amino acids into the organ, then it needs to take the help of a carrier protein. It's just like how you come to school with a school bus. The school bus picks you from your house and drops you safely in your school, right? So that is how. So these carrier proteins also, it actually picks the nutrients from the blood or the, especially here I'm talking about the monosaccharides such as the glucose and the amino acids. It will be picked by the blood and it will be passed through the membrane of the organ and then deposited into that particular organ. So that is how it occurs. So here some substances like glucose and amino acids are absorbed with the help of carrier protein. So this mechanism, because it is taking the help of a particular protein here, it is called as facilitated transport. So facilitated transport, the same thing we had studied on transport of plants also. So if you just go through that particular chapter, you will understand it even more better. It is the same function in the case of the digestion process here in the case of animals or humans as well. So next, talking about the absorption of nutrients, monosaccharides and electrolytes. So various nutrients such as amino acids, monosaccharides like glucose and some electrolytes like sodium, they are absorbed into the blood by an active transport mechanism against a concentration gradient. And because it is going against a concentration gradient and since it is an active transport, it requires a lot of energy. Therefore, it is an active transport. So the monosaccharides such as the glucose, the nutrients like amino acids and the electrolytes like sodium, they are absorbed into the different organs via the blood by a active concentration gradient, therefore requiring a lot of energy. So this is an active transport mechanism. So next we shall understand how the absorption of fatty acids and glycerol take place. So fatty acids and glycerol being insoluble, right? They are insoluble. They are not soluble. They don't dissolve in water. They are insoluble. So they being insoluble cannot be absorbed into the blood. So what might happen? The blood will be separate. The fat molecules or the fat globules will be separate, right? Or the fat droplets might be separate here because they do not mix properly with the blood. They do not get soluble in the blood. So they actually, how do these, so they have a complex, it is a complex mechanism. Then how do they get absorbed? So here what happens here is they are first incorporated into droplets called as micelles. So they form droplets, small droplets called as micelles. Then these micelles, you move into the intestinal mucosa. So where are these fatty acids and glycerol present? They have been formed into simple forms of fatty acids and glycerol in the small intestine. In the small intestine, they form small molecules of called micelles and then they move into the mucosal membrane of the small intestine. From the mucosal membrane, what happens to them? We shall see. After they move into the intestinal mucosa membrane, they are reformed into very small protein-coated fat globules called as chylomicrons. So first what happened? They formed small molecules called micelles. These micelles got absorbed by the intestinal mucosa. Once in the intestinal mucosa, they got converted into, or they reformed themselves into very small protein coated molecules or fat globules called as the chylomicrons. So these chylomicrons will be transferred into the lymph vessels, which are called as the lacteals, and then into the villi, which are the finger-like projections that are there. They will be transported to the lymph vessels and then to the finger-like projections called as the villi. So these lymph vessels are the ones that ultimately release the absorbed substances into the bloodstream. Why so much complicated? Other things, that is glucose or the monosaccharides such as glucose, or nutrients like amino acids, the electrolytes and all that which we had seen, they were directly soluble in blood. So therefore, from the mucosa of the intestine, they could directly enter into the bloodstream, and that blood would carry to different parts of the body or organs, right? But in this particular case, what happens? The fatty acids and the glycerol that are there, or the fats and the glycerol, they are not at all soluble in blood. They are not soluble in any of the liquid medium. So what happens here is, first these oil droplets inside the small intestine, they form into small droplets called as the micelles. And these micelles later on will move into the intestinal mucosa. In the intestinal mucosa, they'll again reform into protein-coated lipid droplets or lipid globules or fat globules called as the chylomicrons. Then these chylomicrons will enter into the lymph vessels. From the lymph vessels, they will be absorbed into the blood, and then the blood will carry to different organs. So this is how the absorption of the fats and the glycerols will occur. So the lymph vessels ultimately release the absorbed substances into the bloodstream, and the bloodstream will carry to different organs for various metabolic activities and all that. So that is how absorption of fatty acids and glycerol take place. So now we shall see the absorption of various substances, like how exactly in the mouth, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, how the absorption occurs. So absorption of substances takes place in different parts of the alimentary canal, such as the mouth, the stomach, the small intestine, and also in the large intestine. Large intestine also absorption occurs, right? Because the excretory product or the undigested food gets absorbed into the large intestine. So however, maximum absorption occurs in the small intestine. That is true. Why? Because the complete digestion of all the biomacromolecules that are present in the food takes place or gets completed in the small intestine. Therefore, it is the mucosa of the small intestine that absorbs major amount of the nutrients or the monosaccharides or the fats and whatnot. So, we shall see what all different absorptions occur in the mouth. So, certain drugs that are coming in contact with the mucosa of the mouth and lower side of the tongue are absorbed into the blood capillaries lining them. So here we take in certain drugs, right? We take in certain tablets and all that, healthy well-being, right? So what happens to these drugs? These drugs also should get digested. Will the tablet or something that you take in remain as such in your body? No, right? There are certain drugs which inside the mouth itself, they mix with the mucosa of the mouth. They come in contact with the mucosa of the mouth, and they also come in contact with the lower area of the tongue, and whatever blood capillaries are present in the mucosa of the mouth and the lower area of the tongue, the blood capillaries will directly absorb this drugs. So the absorption of drug or any tablet or anything or any chemical substance that we take into our mouth, take in, not all, but most of them, the partial absorption would have occurred in the mouth itself. So that is about the absorption in the mouth. Next, talking about absorption in the stomach. Stomach also participates in the absorption. It helps in the absorption of water, some simple sugars, alcohol, etc. are directly absorbed by the stomach. Next, talking about the small intestine. So, small intestine is the principal or the main organ which helps in the absorption of various monosaccharides such as glycerol and various nutrients like amino acids, various electrolytes like calcium ions and sodium ions and all that. So, what exactly, and even fatty acids, glycerol and all that gets absorbed here. So, principal organ of absorption of nutrients. So, small intestine is the main organ that helps in the absorption of whatever nutrients that were present in the digested food. So the digestion is completed in the small intestine, and the final products of digestion such as the glucose, the fructose, the fatty acids, the glycerol and the amino acids are absorbed by the mucosal membrane that is present in the small intestine, and from the mucosal membrane it enters into the bloodstream and the lymph. So here we need to understand that glucose, fructose, amino acids enters into the bloodstream. But fatty acids and glycerol doesn't directly enter into the bloodstream. Why? Because they are insoluble in blood. So that is why they get converted into micelles, droplet-like forms called as micelles, and then these micelles are absorbed by the mucosa. In the mucosa, they get converted into some lipid droplets, and these lipid droplets are then pushed into the lymph vessels, and from the lymph vessels they'll enter into the become protein coated. When they enter into the mucosa, in the mucosa they become protein coated, and then these protein coated lipids or glycerols or micelles, that is the lymph vessels, and from the lymph vessels they enter into the blood. So this is how don't directly enter into the bloodstream. That is why both the bloodstream and the lymph participate in the absorption process here. Next is the large intestine. So the main function of the large intestine is to absorb water, and also it absorbs some minerals and some drugs. So some of the drugs are also absorbed by the large intestine. Large intestine also absorbs large amount of water because for smooth movement of the waste products or undigested food, water is required, and not just that, some of the minerals also get absorbed by the large intestine. This is how the different parts of the alimentary canal such as the mouth, the stomach, the small intestine and the large intestine participate in the absorption of food. So next let us study about assimilation. So we understood that the monosaccharides such as glucose, the nutrients such as amino acids and the fats and the glycerol and various electrolytes, it entered into the bloodstream, right? Now from the bloodstream, how their assimilation or transport to different organs occur, we shall see. So we shall study about assimilation. So the absorbed substances that are there, so the substances absorbed by the blood, right, bloodstream. So those substances, they finally reach the tissues, and these tissues make use of these absorbed substances for various metabolic activities. And this particular process is called as assimilation. So what is assimilation? Assimilation is the process wherein the tissues that are present in the organ, they absorb the nutrients or various substances from the bloodstream so that they can perform various activities. So the digestive waste, now after assimilation, the remaining food that is there, right, that is the waste material. So the digestive waste solidified into coherent fecus. They form solids. They come together, they stick together, they form a solid which is called as the fecus, and this fecus gets stored in the rectum. And once the fecus gets stored in the rectum, a neural signal will be sent to our brain through the nervous system saying that we have to eliminate the particular waste material out of the body because it got collected in the rectum. So a neural reflex will occur causing an urge or desire for its removal. That is called as digestion. So after assimilation, what happens? Digestion will occur. So in digestion, the digestion of the fecus or the excretion of the fecus to the outside through the anal opening will occur. So in the rectum, the excreta will get stored, right? And once the excreta gets stored, neural reflex signal will occur which will make us feel that we need to go and eliminate, that is a waste product outside. So that is nothing but digestion. So the digestion of fecus to the outside will occur through the anal opening that is there, and this particular process is called as defecation, and it is a voluntary process, right? It is not involuntary. It is under our will. It is under our control. It is a voluntary process and it is carried out by a mass of lots of peristaltic movement. So a lot of peristaltic movement will occur in the muscle layer of the rectum and the anus, therefore resulting in the digestion or the elimination, the excretion of the fecus out of the body. So this is the end product of the end of digestion. So first one was ingestion, then came assimilation, and this is the last one, that is the digestion. So this was about the complete digestion, how it occurs in a human body. So next we shall study about the disorders of the digestive system. What are the different diseases that can occur to the digestive system? So one of the important disorder is the inflammation of the intestinal tract. So inflammation or the swelling of the intestinal tract can occur because of various reasons or external factors, such as because of bacteria or because of viral infection. So that is why they say we should not drink contaminated water. We should only eat properly cooked food. Never go in for raw food. Raw food also better blanch it and then eat it. Don't directly eat it, because every time we cannot say that the food is clean and neat, right? So that is why. Or we can wash it in vinegar properly or in salt water properly and then consume it, or just wash it in boiling water properly and then consume it, so that we can prevent various bacterial and viral infections from occurring or from causing inflammation to the small intestine. And next is one more disorder or infection can be caused by various parasites that tend to thrive in the intestine. There are a lot of parasites, so that is why sometimes we should not walk barefoot, especially when we are having a wound or something in our leg. We are not supposed to walk barefoot. What happens? In the soil, some parasites will be there. Those parasites will enter into our body through the wound, and it will go and reside in the intestine, because the digestion process gets completed in the small intestine, right? They will go and reside in the small intestine, absorbing all the nutrients from the digested food, therefore making our immune system weak and also our body weak, because we will be deprived of nutrition. So that is why we have to be very careful. And also sometimes these parasites enter into our body through uncooked food. So that is why we need to be very careful while having food. So the infections are also caused by parasites of the intestine, such as the tapeworm. Then we have the roundworm, the threadworm, hookworm, pinworm, etc. So these are the different types of parasites that live in a small intestine, feeding on the nutrients that are there in a small intestine. So we have the tapeworm, and it is said that the tapeworm can grow a lot number of times than a human body. It can grow double the length of a human body or the height of a human body. So imagine what major harm it can cause to the person, right? And also there is this roundworm, which is Ascaris. Then we have the threadworm. Then there is this hookworm and pinworm. So all these are the different parasites that cause various infectious diseases in the digestive tract, especially the intestinal region. So talking about some of the diseases that can be caused because of the disorders of the digestive system. One such is the jaundice. So jaundice usually affects the liver. So liver also participates in the process of digestion. We had studied, right, because bile is secreted by the liver, and bile is one of the important component for digestion to occur, right? So therefore, if the liver is affected, what happens? The accumulation of bile will start. So if the accumulation of bile will start, then what will happen? The skin, the eyes, all that will turn yellow because of the deposition of the bile pigments. The bile pigments, because of overproduction of the bile pigments, rather than moving into only the intestine, it will get deposited in the skin, in the eyes and all that, therefore turning a body yellow. So that is nothing but jaundice. So this is also one of the important digestive disorders. Next is vomiting. So vomiting can occur if we eat too much of food than required for our digestion, and also if we do not have a good activity, if we eat too much of food and food doesn't get digested properly, also vomiting can occur. So there are various reasons why vomiting can occur. Therefore, because of the disorder that occurs in the stomach, it has been placed under the digestive disorder as well. So vomiting is nothing but it is the egestion or throwing out of the contents that is present in the stomach because of some undigestion related issues. Whatever food will not reach the small intestine. From the stomach itself, because of overeating or because of undigestion, what happens? It will be put out through the mouth. So that is the egestion of stomach contents through the mouth is nothing but called as vomiting. So this is a reflex action that is controlled by the vomit center in the medulla. So in our brain, that is the medulla region of the brain, our brain will receive certain signals saying that something has entered into your body which is not good. Just throw it out. So vomiting is actually in one way good. Of course, if too much vomiting occurs, we can lose water and lead to dehydration. That is one problem. But keeping that aside, sometimes vomiting can also help because if any undesirable food we eat which is not good for the body, that can be ejected out by the vomiting process. Therefore, it can harm or also it can be good to the body. So that is the reason. So this reflex action is controlled by the vomit center that is present in the brain, that is called as the medulla. And that is why sometimes if we have a brain injury, especially in the medulla region also, it can lead to vomiting. So that is the reason. And a feeling of nausea can also precede vomiting. Nausea means the urge to vomit or the sensation of vomiting can also occur. So this is also a digestive disorder. So next, talking about one more digestive disorder, diarrhea. So diarrhea can also be caused because of the microorganisms that are present in the food, and also it can be caused due to various other factors as well. So the abnormal frequency of bowel movement, sometimes watery bowel movement might occur, bowel movement might occur with a lot of stomach ache, all that is nothing but diarrhea. So the abnormal frequency of bowel movement with increased liquidity in the fecal discharge is known as diarrhea. And therefore, what happens, whatever food we eat, it will not get digested properly and we'll start eliminating it out of the body. So if diarrhea occurs now and then the proper nutrients will not get absorbed by a body. So it reduces the absorption of food properly, therefore making the person malnourished. So that is why diarrhea is also one of the fatal digestive disorder. Next, talking about one more digestive disorder is constipation. So in diarrhea, whatever food we eat, because of some digestive disorder, it will just get eliminated out of the body before it gets properly digested and absorbed to different parts of the body, therefore making the person deprived of nutrition. But constipation is quite opposite to that of diarrhea. In constipation, the person will not be able to excrete properly or defecate properly. So in constipation, the fecals are retained within the colon itself, right? The undigested food or the waste products has to enter into the large intestine, and through the large intestine it has to be stored in the rectum, and from the rectum it has to come out through the anal opening. But here what happens here is, in the large intestine itself, the bowel will get stuck. It will get accumulated over a period of time and it will not come out, leading to a lot of irregular bowel movement, and not just that, it will lead to a lot of discomfort in the stomach and all that. So that is nothing but constipation. So constipation is also one of the digestive disorders. Next, one more digestive disorder is indigestion. So this is a condition in which the food is not properly digested, leading to feeling of fullness. So for digestion, what happens? 4 hours, right? Maximum 4 to 5 hours, the food will be in the stomach and then it will pass to the small intestine. But sometimes what happens is that if we eat over excess, it may lead to indigestion, or sometimes if we eat too much spicy food also, it may lead to indigestion, wherein the food will remain undigested in the stomach itself. Therefore, even after 4 to 5 hours also, we will not feel hungry, because in the stomach is already filled, right, with the undigested food. So that is nothing but indigestion. So the causes of indigestion are improper secretion or inadequate secretion of the enzymes, anxiety. So anxiety or stress also leads to an improper secretion of various digestive enzymes, leading to the indigestion of the food, and also food poisoning, then overeating, and also some spicy foods are the main reasons for indigestion to occur in the human stomach. So this was about this particular chapter, wherein we completely studied about the human digestive system, starting from learning about the different organs that are present in the digestive system or the alimentary canal, and then learning about how exactly the different biomacromolecules that are present in the food got digested right from the mouth to that of the small intestine. After that, we studied about the assimilation process, that is how the food gets absorbed to different organs, and also we studied about the mechanism of absorption, and also we learnt about the digestion process, that is how the undigested food leaves the body by a process called as excretion or defecation. So all that we studied, and also we learnt about the various disorders that can occur if the alteration or if the mechanism in the digestive system gets altered. So all this we studied in this particular chapter. So we shall meet again with new sessions taking up a new chapter. Thank you.